Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Anatomy and Physiology, 13th edition. Narrated by Omar Mohsen Ibrahim Fouad. The time now is 9:08 p.m. Today is Wednesday, August 19th, 2026. Chapter 16, Autonomic Nervous System. Lecture outline. The autonomic nervous system consists of parasympathetic division and sympathetic division. Autonomic nervous system, motor system that maintains homeostasis of the body by regulating unconscious activity, particularly of smooth muscle, cardiac muscle, and glands. Parasympathetic division, also called rest and digest or craniosacral division, exhibits increased activity under resting conditions. Sympathetic division, also called fight or flight or thoracolumbar division, exhibits increased activity during physical activity and or stress. (16.1) Overview of the autonomic nervous system. ANS maintains homeostasis by regulating involuntary activities. For example, heart rate, breathing rate, body temperature, digestive processes, and urinary functions. Part of motor division of nervous system. Somatic motor, skeletal muscle, autonomic motor, smooth muscle, cardiac muscle, glands. ANS divided into sympathetic fight or flight division, parasympathetic rest and digest division, and enteric nervous system, digestive tract. 16.2 Contrasting the somatic and autonomic nervous systems. Peripheral nerves contain both motor and sensory neurons. Among the motor neurons, some of these are somatic and innervate skeletal muscles, while some are autonomic and innervate smooth muscle, cardiac muscle, and glands. Sensory neurons are not subdivided into somatic and autonomic since there is overlap in function. For example, pain receptors can stimulate both somatic and autonomic reflexes. Comparing the somatic and autonomic nervous systems. Table 16.1 Comparison of the somatic and autonomic nervous systems. Somatic nervous system, autonomic nervous system, effector, skeletal muscle, effector, somatic nervous system, skeletal muscle, autonomic nervous system, smooth muscle, cardiac muscle, and glands. Regulation, somatic nerve system, regulation, somatic nervous system, controls all conscious and unconscious movements of skeletal muscle. Autonomic nervous system, unconscious regulation, although influenced by conscious mental functions. Response to stimulation. Somatic nervous system, skeletal muscle contracts. Autonomic nervous system, target tissues are stimulated or inhibited. Neuron arrangement. Somatic nervous system, one neuron extends from the central nervous system, CNS, to skeletal muscle. Autonomic nervous system, there are two neurons in series. The preganglionic neuron extends from the CNS to an autonomic ganglion, and the postganglionic neuron extends from the autonomic ganglion to the target tissue. Neuron cell body location. Somatic nervous system, Neuron cell bodies are in motor nuclei of the cranial nerves and in the ventral horn of the spinal cord. Autonomic nervous system. Preganglionic neuron cell bodies are in autonomic nuclei of the cranial nerves and in the lateral horn of the spinal cord. Postganglionic neuron cell bodies are in autonomic ganglia. Number of synapses. Somatic nervous system. One synapse between the somatic motor neuron and the skeletal muscle. Autonomic nervous system. Two synapses. First is in the autonomic ganglia and second is at the target tissue. Myeliniation of axons. Somatic nervous system. Myelinated. Autonomic nervous system. Preganglionic axons are myelinated. Postganglionic axons are unmyelinated. Neurotransmitter. Somatic nervous system. Acetylcholine. Autonomic nervous system. Preganglionic neurons release acetylcholine. Postganglionic neurons release acetylcholine, norepinephrine, or epinephrine. Receptor molecules. Somatic nervous system. Receptor molecules for acetylcholine are nicotinic. Autonomic nervous system. In autonomic ganglia, receptor molecules for acetylcholine are nicotinic. In target issues, receptor molecules for organization of somatic and autonomic nervous system neurons. Spinal nerve, spinal cord, somatic motor neuron, myelinated, skeletal muscle. A. Somatic nervous system, spinal cord, spinal nerve, autonomic ganglion, smooth muscle, preganglionic neuron, myelinated, cardiac muscle, postganglionic neuron, unmyelinated, glands. B. Autonomic nervous system. 16.3 Anatomy of the autonomic nervous system. Sympathetic thoracolumbar division. Preganglionic cell bodies in lateral horns of spinal cord T1 to L2. Thoracolumbar. Preganglionic axons pass through ventral roots to white remi communicates to the sympathetic chain ganglia or collateral ganglia. Preganglionic neuron, postganglionic neuron. Preganglionic cell body in lateral horn of gray matter. Preganglionic neuron to sympathetic chain ganglion. Postganglionic neurons. Preganglionic neuron to collateral ganglion. Postganglionic neurons, collateral ganglia, sympathetic chain ganglia. Routes of sympathetic axons. 1. Spinal nerves. Preganglionic axons synapse at the same or different level with postganglionic neurons within the sympathetic chain. These postganglionic neurons exit the ganglia through the gray rami communicates. These postganglionic neurons exit the ganglia through the gray rami communicantis and re-enter spinal nerves to supply the skin and blood vessels of skeletal muscles. Preganglionic neuron, postganglionic neuron, dorsal root ganglion, ventral root, preganglionic axon in a spinal nerve, white ramus communicans, sympathetic chain, sympathetic chain ganglion, gray ramus communicans, postganglionic axon, and a spinal nerve. Routes of sympathetic axons. 1. Sympathetic nerves. Preganglionic axon synapse at the same or different level with postganglionic neurons which exit the ganglia through sympathetic nerves. Preganglionic axon and a spinal nerve. White ramus communicans, sympathetic chain ganglion, sympathetic nerve, postganglionic axon. Heart. Routes of sympathetic axons. 1. Collateral ganglia via splanchnic nerves. Preganglionic axons pass through the chain ganglia without synapsing to form splanchnic nerves. Preganglionic axons then synapse with postganglionic nerve. Preganglionic axons then synapse with postganglionic neurons in collateral ganglia. Postganglionic neurons then send fibers to target organs, viscera. Preganglionic axon and a spinal nerve. White ramus communicans, sympathetic chain ganglion, splanchnic nerve, preganglionic axon, collateral ganglion, postganglionic axon, viscera. Routes of sympathetic axons. 1. Innervation to the adrenal gland. Preganglionic axons synapse with the cells of the adrenal medulla. Embryologically, adrenal medulla is derived from same cells as postganglionic ANS cells. Medullary cells secrete epinephrine and norepinephrine, act as hormones promoting physical activity. Preganglionic axon and a spinal nerve. White ramus communicans, sympathetic chain ganglion, splanchnic nerve, collateral ganglion, preganglionic axon, adrenal gland. Anatomy of autonomic nervous system. Parasympathetic craniosacral division. Preganglionic cell bodies and nuclei of brain stem or lateral parts of spinal cord, gray matter from S2 to S4. Preganglionic axons from brain pass to terminal ganglia through cranial nerves. III, VII, IX, and X. Preganglionic axons from sacral region pass through pelvic splanchnic nerves to terminal ganglia. Terminal ganglia located near organ, innervated or embedded in wall of organ. Preganglionic neuron, postganglionic neuron, midbrain, pons, medulla. Brainstem, cranial nerves, postganglionic neurons, terminal ganglia, preganglionic neurons, pelvic splanchnic nerves, sacral region of spinal cord S2 through S4. Comparison of the sympathetic and parasympathetic divisions. Table 16.2, comparison of the sympathetic and parasympathetic divisions. Sympathetic division, parasympathetic division, location of preganglionic cell body. Sympathetic division, lateral horns of thoracic and lumbar regions of the spinal cord, gray matter, T1 through L2. Parasympathetic division, brainstem and lateral horns of the sacral region of the spinal cord, gray matter, S2 through S4. Outflow from the CNS. Sympathetic division, spinal nerves, postganglionic axons, sympathetic nerves, postganglionic axons, splanchnic nerves, preganglionic axons. Parasympathetic division, cranial nerves, preganglionic axons, pelvic, splanchnic nerves, preganglionic axons. Ganglia. Sympathetic division, sympathetic chain ganglia along spinal cord for spinal and sympathetic nerves, collateral ganglia for splanchnic nerves. Parasympathetic division, terminal ganglia near or on effector organ. Number of postganglionic neurons for each preganglionic neuron. Sympathetic division, much divergence. Parasympathetic division, few, less divergence. Relative length of neurons. Sympathetic division, short preganglionic, long postganglionic. Parasympathetic division, brainstem and lateral horns of the sacral region of the spinal cord, gray matter, S2 through S4. Cranial nerves, preganglionic axons, pelvic, splanchnic nerves, preganglionic axons. Terminal ganglion, near or on effector organ, few, less divergence. Relative length of neurons. Sympathetic division, short preganglionic, long postganglionic. Parasympathetic division, long preganglionic, short postganglionic. Autonomic nerve plexus and distribution of autonomic nerve fibers. Sympathetic axons reach organs through 1. Spinal nerves, innervate sweat glands, smooth muscle of blood vessels to skeletal muscle and skin, and erector pili. 2. Head and neck nerve plexuses, innervate sweat glands, smooth muscle of blood vessels to skeletal muscle and skin, and erector pili. 3. Thoracic nerve plexuses, cardiac and pulmonary, heart and lungs. 4. Abdominal pelvic nerve plexuses, celiac, superior mesenteric, inferior mesenteric, hypogastric plexuses, organs of abdominal pelvic cavity. Sympathetic outflow via autonomic plexuses. Preganglionic neuron, postganglionic neuron, spinal cord. 1. Eye, nasal mucosa. Sublingual and submandibular glands, parotid gland, sympathetic nerves. 2. Trachea, lung, heart. 3. A celiac ganglion, greater splanchnic nerve, superior mesenteric ganglion, liver, stomach, pancreas, spleen. Wow. That's what they've been hiding from me all this time. That's why I haven't been able to get high quality medical care. They're trying to cover up one thing with the next. They'll tell you one thing is wrong with you, but they won't tell you that it affects another thing. And when you complain about another thing, they try to make you feel guilty about it, as if it has nothing to do with the original injury, which is my neck and my spine, my neck and my back injury. Liver, stomach, pancreas, spleen, adrenal gland, kidney, large intestine, small intestine, celiac ganglion, superior mesenteric ganglion, lesser splanchnic nerve, T1, L2, lumbar splanchnic nerves, 3C, inferior mesenteric ganglion, large intestine, small intestine, lumbar splanchnic nerves. Sympathetic chain, sacral splanchnic nerves, 3D, hypogastric ganglion, urinary system, and genitalia. Autonomic nerve plexuses and distribution of autonomic nerve fibers. Parasympathetic axons reach organs through cranial nerves, oculomotor 111, through ciliary ganglion, ciliary muscles and iris, facial VII through pituitary guppellatin ganglion and submandibular ganglion, lacrimal glands, mucosal glands of nasal cavity and palate, some salivary glands, glossopharyngeal IX through otic ganglion, parotid salivary gland, vagus nerve and thoracic nerve plexuses, heart, lungs, esophagus through esophageal plexus, vagus nerve and abdominal pelvic nerve plexuses, supply stomach, gallbladder, biliary ducts, pancreas, small intestine, ascending colon, and transverse colon, pelvic splanchnic nerves and nerve plexuses, colon, urinary bladder, reproductive organs, parasympathetic division, distribution of autonomic postganglionic neurons, preganglionic neuron, postganglionic neuron, medulla, S2, S3, S4, 1A, medulla, 111, 1A, ciliary ganglion, VII, 1B, pituitary guppellatin ganglion, lacrimal gland, IX, submandibular ganglion, IX, 1C, otic ganglion, X, trachea, 2, lung, heart, liver, stomach, 3, spleen, adrenal gland, pancreas, kidney, small intestine, large intestine, S2, S3, S4, 4, pelvic splanchnic nerve, urinary system and genitalia, Parasympathetic craniosacral. Sensory neurons in autonomic nerve plexuses. Axons of sensory neurons run with ANS axons within ANS nerves and plexuses. Parts of reflex arcs regulating organ activities transmit pain and pressure sensations from organs to the CNS. Enteric nervous system consists of nerve plexuses within the wall of digestive tract, sources of neurons, sensory neurons that connect the digestive tract to CNS, ANS motor neurons that connect CNS to digestive tract, enteric neurons that are confined to enteric plexuses, monitors the digestive tract, and controls smooth muscles and glands for the CNS or independently through local reflexes. Enteric nervous system, types of enteric neurons. Enteric sensory neurons detect changes in the chemical composition of the contents of the digestive tract or detect stretch of the digestive tract wall. Enteric motor neurons stimulate or inhibit smooth muscle contraction and gland secretion. Enteric interneurons connect enteric sensory and motor neurons to each other. 16.4 Physiology of the autonomic nervous system maintains homeostasis by adjusting body functions to match the level of physical activity. Dual innervation by both sympathetic and parasympathetic divisions. Most organs are dually innervated. Sympathetic influences during exercise, fight or flight response, increased HR vasodilation of BV in skeletal and cardiac muscle, dilation of air passages, increased glucose production, increased body temp, decreased digestion and urine production, parasympathetic influences during resting conditions, stimulation of digestion and urine production, lowers HR, constricts air passages. Effects of the sympathetic and parasympathetic divisions on various effectors. Table 16.3 Effects of the sympathetic and parasympathetic divisions on various effectors continue. Effector, sympathetic effects and receptor type, parasympathetic effects and receptor type. Adipose tissue. Effector, adipose tissue. Sympathetic effects and receptor type, lipid breakdown and release of fatty acids, A2 and B1. Parasympathetic effects and receptor type, none. Effector, erector pili muscle, sympathetic effects and receptor type, contraction A1, parasympathetic effects and receptor type, none. Effector, blood, platelets, sympathetic effects and receptor type, increased coagulation A2, parasympathetic effects and receptor type, none. Effector, blood vessels, sympathetic effects and receptor type, parasympathetic effects and receptor type. Effector, arterioles carry blood to tissue. Arterioles carry blood to tissues. Effector, digestive organs, sympathetic effects and receptor type, constriction A1, parasympathetic effects and receptor type, none. Effector, heart, sympathetic effects and receptor type, constriction A1, parasympathetic effects and receptor type, none. Effector, heart, sympathetic effects and receptor type, constriction A1, and dilation B2 plus. Parasympathetic effects and receptor type, none. Effector, kidneys, sympathetic effects and receptor type, constriction A1 and A2, dilation B1 and B2. Parasympathetic effects and receptor type, none. Effector lungs, sympathetic effects and receptor type, constriction A1 and dilation B2, parasympathetic effects and receptor type, none. Effector skeletal muscle, effector lungs, constriction A1, dilation B2, parasympathetic effects and receptor type, none. Effector skeletal muscle, sympathetic effects and receptor type, constriction A1 and dilation B2, parasympathetic effects and receptor type, none. Effector skin, sympathetic effects and receptor type, constriction A1 and A2, parasympathetic effects and receptor type, none. Effector veins, carry blood away from tissues, sympathetic effects and receptor type, constriction A1 and A2, dilation B2, parasympathetic effects and receptor type, none. Effects of the sympathetic and parasympathetic divisions on various effectors. Table 16.3 effects of the sympathetic and parasympathetic divisions on various effectors continue. Effector eye, effector ciliary muscle, sympathetic effects and receptor type, relaxation for far vision B2, parasympathetic effects and receptor type, contraction for near vision M. Effector pupil, sympathetic effector and receptor type, dilation A1++, parasympathetic effects and receptor type, constriction M++. Effector gallbladder, parasympathetic effector gallbladder, sympathetic effects and receptor type, relaxation B2, parasympathetic effects and receptor type, contraction M. Effector glands, effector adrenal, sympathetic effects and receptor type, release of epinephrine and norepinephrine, N, parasympathetic effects and receptor type, none. Effector gastric, decreased gastric secretion A2, parasympathetic effects and receptor type, increased gastric secretion M. Lacrimal, effector lacrimal, sympathetic effects and receptor type, slight tear production A, parasympathetic effects and receptor type, increased tear secretion M. Effector pancreas, sympathetic effects and receptor type, decreased insulin secretion A2, decreased exocrine secretion A, parasympathetic effects and receptor type, increased insulin secretion M, increased exocrine secretion M. Effector salivary, sympathetic effects and receptor type, constriction of blood vessels and slight production of thick, viscous saliva A1, parasympathetic effects and receptor type, dilation of blood vessels and thin, copious saliva M. Effector sweat, effector apocrine, sympathetic effects and receptor type, thick organic secretion M, parasympathetic effects and receptor type, none. Eccrine, effector eccrine, sympathetic effects and receptor type, watery sweat from most of the skin M, sweat from palms and soles A1, parasympathetic effects and receptor type, none. Effects of the sympathetic and parasympathetic divisions on various effectors. Table 16.3 effects of the sympathetic and parasympathetic divisions on various effectors continue. Effector, sympathetic effects and receptor type, parasympathetic effects and receptor type. Effector heart, sympathetic effects and receptor type, increased rate and force of contraction B1, B2, parasympathetic effects and receptor type, decreased rate of contraction M. Effector liver, sympathetic effects and receptor type. Glucose released into blood, A1B2. Parasympathetic effects and receptor type, none. Effector, lungs. Sympathetic effects and receptor type. Dilated air passageways, B2. Parasympathetic effects and receptor type. Constricted air passageways, M. Effector, metabolism. Sympathetic effects and receptor type. Increased up to 100%, A and B. Parasympathetic effects and receptor type, none. Effector, sex organs. Sympathetic effects and receptor type. Ejaculation, A1, and erection. Parasympathetic effects and receptor type. Erection. M. Effector, skeletal muscles. Sympathetic effects and receptor type. Breakdown of glycogen to glucose, B2. Parasympathetic effects and receptor type. None. Effector, stomach and intestines. Effector, wall. Sympathetic effects and receptor type. Decreased tone, A1, A2, B2. Parasympathetic effects and receptor type. Increased motility, M. Effector, sphincter. Sympathetic effects and receptor type. Increased tone, A1. Parasympathetic effects and receptor type. Decreased tone, M. Effects of the sympathetic and parasympathetic divisions on various effectors. Table 16.3. Effects of the sympathetic and parasympathetic divisions on various effectors continue. Effector, sympathetic effects and receptor type. Parasympathetic effects and receptor type. Effector, urinary bladder. Effector, wall detrusor. Sympathetic effects and receptor type. Relaxation, B3. Parasympathetic effects and receptor type. Contraction, M. Effector, neck of bladder. Sympathetic effects and receptor type. Contraction, A1. Parasympathetic effects and receptor type. Relaxation, M. Effector, internal urinary sphincter. Sympathetic effects and receptor type. Contraction, A1. Parasympathetic effects and receptor type. Relaxation, M. Receptor subtypes are indicated. The receptors are A1 and A2 adrenergic, B1 minus, B2 minus, and B3 adrenergic minus. Nicotinic, cholinergic, N, and muscarinic, cholinergic, M. Plus, normally, blood flow increases through coronary arteries because of increased demand by cardiac tissue for oxygen. Local control of blood flow is discussed in Chapter 21. In experiments that isolate the coronary arteries, sympathetic nerve stimulation acting through adrenergic receptors causes vasoconstriction. The B adrenergic receptors are relatively insensitive to sympathetic nerve stimulation, but can be activated by epinephrine released from the adrenal gland and by drugs. As a result, coronary arteries vasodilate. Plus, contraction of the radial muscles of the iris causes the pupil to dilate. Contraction of the circular muscles causes the pupil to constrict. See Chapter 15. Decreased stimulation of alpha receptors by the sympathetic division can cause vasodilation of penile blood vessels, resulting in an erection. Neurotransmitters, primary substances produced by neurons of ANS. Acetylcholine, released by cholinergic neurons. All preganglionic neurons of the sympathetic and parasympathetics divisions. All postganglionic neurons and the parasympathetic division sympathetic postganglionic neurons that innervate thermoregulatory sweat glands, norepinephrine released by adrenergic neurons, most sympathetic postganglionic neurons. Other substances found in ANS neurons include nitric oxide, eicosanoids, gastrin, somatostatin, cholecystokinin, VIP, enkephalins, substance P, dopamine, serotonin, and histamine. Receptors. Certain cells have receptors that combine with neurotransmitters, causing a response in the cell. Cholinergic bind acetylcholine, have two different forms, nicotinic and muscarinic. Nicotinic, all receptors on postganglionic neurons, all skeletal muscles, adrenal glands. Muscarinic, all receptors on parasympathetic effectors, receptors of some sweat glands. Adrenergic receptors bind norepinephrine and epinephrine, alpha and beta receptors. These are further subdivided into categories A1, A2, and B1, B2, B3. A1 and B1 usually have opposite effects than A2 and B2. Drugs can also interact with receptors to alter ANS activity. Agonists bind to receptors and activate them. Antagonists bind to receptors and prevent activation. Locations of ANS receptors. 1. Nicotinic receptors are located on the cell bodies of both sympathetic and parasympathetic postganglionic neurons in autonomic ganglia. Binding of ACH to nicotinic receptors has an excitatory effect. 2. Muscarinic receptors are located on the cells of all parasympathetic effectors and some sympathetic effectors, such as sweat glands. Binding of ACH to muscarinic receptors may be excitatory or inhibitory. A. Nicotinic receptors, preganglionic neuron, ACH released. Location of nicotinic receptors, postganglionic neuron. B. Muscarinic receptors, preganglionic neuron. Location of nicotinic receptors, ACH released. Location of muscarinic receptors, ACH released. Postganglionic neuron. Cell of effector. Locations of ANS receptors. 1. Adrenergic receptors are located on most sympathetic effectors. Binding of NE to adrenergic receptors may be excitatory or inhibitory, depending on the specific effector. Preganglionic neuron. C. Adrenergic receptors, preganglionic neuron. Location of nicotinic receptors, ACH released. Postganglionic neuron. Location of adrenic receptors, NE released. Cell of effector. 16.5 Regulation of the autonomic nervous system. Autonomic reflexes, control, most of activity of visceral organs, glands, and blood vessels through adjustments to smooth muscle, cardiac muscle, and glands. Autonomic reflex activity influenced by hypothalamus and higher brain centers, but it is the hypothalamus that has overall control of the ANS. Sympathetic and parasympathetic divisions influence activities of enteric nervous system through autonomic reflexes. These involve the CNS, but the enteric nervous system can function independently of CNS through local reflexes. For example, when wall of digestive tract is stretched, sensory neurons send information to enteric plexus, and then motor responses sent to smooth muscle of gut wall, and the muscle contracts. Autonomic reflexes. A. Parasympathetic reflex via vagus lowers heart rate. B. Sympathetic reflex via cardiac accelerator nerves. Sympathetic cause heart rate to increase. A. Glossopharyngeal nerve increase in blood pressure detected by carotid baroreceptors. Common carotid artery. Integration in medulla oblongata. Vagus nerve. Terminal ganglion. Heart rate decreases, causing blood pressure to decrease. Heart. Glossopharyngeal nerve. Decrease in blood pressure detected by carotid baroreceptors. Common carotid artery. Integration in medulla oblongata. Spinal cord. Sympathetic nerve. Heart rate increases, causing blood pressure to increase. B. Sympathetic chain ganglion. Higher parts of the CNS influencing autonomic function. Table 16.4. Higher parts of the CNS influencing autonomic functions. CNS component effects on ANS. CNS component cerebrum and limbic system effects on ANS. Thoughts and emotions can influence ANS functions through the hypothalamus. CNS component hypothalamus effects on ANS integrating center that interacts with the cerebrum, limbic system, brainstem, and spinal cord. Also regulates body temperature. CNS component brainstem effects on ANS reflex centers for controlling pupil size, accommodation, tear production, salivation, coughing, swallowing, digestive activities, heart rate and force of contraction, blood vessel diameter, and respiration. A CNS component, spinal cord, effects on ANS reflex centers for regulating defecation, urination, penile, and clitoral erection and ejaculation. Enteric nervous system, autonomic and local reflexes, regulation of activity of digestive tract, sensory neurons of enteric plexuses supply CNS with information. Autonomic neurons affect responses of smooth muscle and glands. Local reflex does not involve CNS, produces involuntary unconscious stereotypical response to stimulus, for example, stretch of wall of digestive tract, causes contraction of smooth muscle of the wall. 16.6 Functional generalizations about the autonomic nervous system. Dual innervation to most organs, with sympathetic and parasympathetic having the opposite effects. When a single structure is dually innervated, usually the two ANS divisions have opposite effects. Either division alone can coordinate activities of different structures, for example, parasympathetic control of digestion. Both divisions may act together. Both divisions may act together to coordinate the activities of different structures, for example, erection and ejaculation. Effects of the ANS may be general or local. Usually, sympathetic effects are more widespread and general parasympathetic effects more local. Hormone release by the adrenal medulla aids in the widespread effects of sympathetic system. Representative diseases and disorders of the ANS. Table 16.5, representative diseases and disorders of the autonomic nervous system. Condition description. Condition: Raynaud disease. Description: spasmodic contraction of blood vessels and poor circulation, particularly in the fingers, resulting in cold hands, prone to ulcerations and gangrene. Results from blood vessels that show exaggerated sensitivity to sympathetic innervations. Treatments include preganglionic denervation. Cutting the preganglionic neuron. Condition: hyperhidrosis. Description: excessive sweating caused by exaggerated sympathetic innervation of the sweat glands. Condition: dysautonomia. Description: autosomal recessive genetic disorder characterized by reduced tear gland secretion, poor vasomotor control, trouble swallowing, and other symptoms. Condition: Hirschsprung disease. Description: also known as megacolon, a functional obstruction in the lower colon and rectum that inhibits peristaltic contractions, leading to accumulation of feces in the affected area, caused by ineffective parasympathetic stimulation and a predominance of sympathetic stimulation of the colon. The time now is 10 p.m. Today is Wednesday, August 19th, 2026. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.